Okay, good morning, everybody. We're recording, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to our final formal session of what has been a really tremendous PD series. Again, I just want to give huge shouts out to Jen and Rich for pulling off such a great feat. I really personally appreciate it, and I know that your colleagues really appreciate all of the work that you have been doing to help us get launched to start the new school year. And it certainly has not been without its challenges, and yet we are going to get to the first day and we're going to have a great year, I believe that. So I want to welcome you all to our final session today. We're going to be talking about beginning a conversation around anti-racist teaching practices. And I'm really excited that I'm not going to be making this presentation on my own, and that Jen Gritman and also Larry Pratt have graciously co-planned this session with me, and we're going to be sharing it with you today. So I feel really excited about the conversation we're going to keep having this morning. We're just going to be together for about 90 minutes, so I'm going to move quickly. I should probably share my screen, huh, Jen? Okay, so.
I'm going to post the link a couple times because I think maybe as people log in, it might not be visible.
Got it. All right, so I'm going to close my other browser windows here. And then I'm going to share my screen. In 1 second. Okay, here we go. All right, here I go, sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. So I sort of just want to remind us of just a couple pieces that have sort of brought us to this moment, particularly in our context, right? So we ended the school year having a conversation about race. If you will remember, Superintendent Wells, Board Member Doss, Larry Pratt, and then also Will Kaysen, our mental health folk at the middle school, sort of invited us to a listening session, and we had an opportunity to hear from their perspectives about the experience of racism as they have known it and experienced it. So that happened at the end of June, and I think many people sort of walked away from that conversation feeling sort of really energized and charged around sort of continuing this work. And so on the 13th of August, about 75 of us had the opportunity to be in a forum together, just sharing the work that we had been doing over the summer. And we asked 4 questions. We asked what folks had been learning about. We asked what folks were sort of getting out of that work. We asked what folks were sort of planning to do moving forward, and we asked what support folks needed. And so there were a lot of resources that were collected there. Our EdTech website has a lot of resources, and so you know, we just have been sort of informally, I think, right, sort of making this work a priority for ourselves, this work around anti-racist teaching, culturally responsive teaching, however you want to name it. And so today we're going to sort of continue that conversation together as a group. So here is just, here are some of the things we're going to be hitting on today in our little short time. You know, we're going to be setting the stage today for the work that we're going to be doing this year. So a couple things we're going to do today are sort of define our why, right? We're sort of going to have an opportunity to think about why we're doing this work, why this is important work, and why we're taking it up now with such zeal and commitment. And then we're going to be sharing, beginning to share a common language, right? Speaking about things, sort of using their names and labels explicitly, having that conversation, and then also just sort of beginning to do some self-reflective work. So that's what we're sort of up to today. And we'll sort of be hinting at what will come next for this process. I was thinking about something a teacher I had once who said that change is a process, not a program. Right, this is a process. We're going to be going through a process both today and moving forward. And so we just hold that this is a process, not a program. And we move forward. Sort of, Stephen said something super profound this morning when he talked about obstacles being the path. And that I think is sort of pretty apropos to our conversation today too. So just to sort of ground our work, We have these 4 agreements from Courageous Conversations, which is a work by Glenn Singleton. And I invite you, Jen and Larry, on. I'm just going to sort of go through these a bit quickly and invite you to chime in at any time. So the idea of staying engaged, right? I think particularly when we're beginning to talk about conversations around race and racism, you know, that can bring up feelings for folks, right? That can sort of cause us to have big feelings, Jen called them yesterday. And so the idea of staying engaged means sort of just like sort of sticking with it, right? Like if you feel like you sort of need a moment to turn your video off, to sort of collect your thoughts, you do that and then you come right back, right? But that you stay engaged with the content, you stay engaged with your colleagues, and then you sort of just continue to be engaged with sort of whatever the processing is that is happening for you in that moment. Did you want to add anything, Jen or Larry?
No, I think you described it well.
Okay.
Um, all I would add is just that I'm like, having done so much PD in the last 2 weeks, I'm just really aware of how different I feel this morning than I did any other morning. It's just such a different feeling to talk about this than it is to talk about Google, you know, and I'm just really like very aware of that in myself this morning. So
thank you for sharing that. And I think also too, right, just sort of on a practical level this morning, the day before school, you know, there's a lot of high anxiety around sort of launching the school year tomorrow. And so if you can just for sort of the next 90 minutes, just set that aside and sort of just be here in this space and be engaged with this work, I think that that will be of great benefit to you. So the next agreement is speaking your truth. And it is just what it sounds like, right? It is speaking your truth. It's not saying, it's not sharing thoughts or feelings that you think are acceptable or that you think people want to hear. It means being open to the thoughts of others. I had an experience with this speaking your truth a little bit ago, and it produced tears, and I wasn't expecting that, particularly in a professional and formal setting. So that idea of speaking your truth, I think, is really, really powerful, especially if, for whatever reason, you sort of tend to maybe sort of hold on to your own thoughts or hold on to sort of your own truth. So I really encourage you today and moving forward to sort of really lean into this idea of speaking your truth. Larry or Jen, did you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think this is a crucial one for doing the work. Speaking your truth, it does take courage, and it takes, you know, you're taking a risk, and you are trusting that the people in the room, that your colleagues will, you know, assume best intent, try to understand. But I think it's important for any conversation of this sensitive nature to really be productive. I view it as absolutely critical that everyone speak their truth, regardless of where you enter the conversation. Okay. Jen, you have anything you want to add there?
I would just add right here that we experienced a lot of this. We spent many hours together, the 3 of us, over the weekend planning for today. And there was a whole lot of speaking our truth that happened in the process of planning for today. And so it was great to kind of see this little kind of example of what, you know, work we're hoping happens between colleagues, what work we hope it happens between teachers and students, and between friends and family and out in the world. So having had just an intimate experience with that this weekend, I agree about the power of it.
Yeah. And I'll just add this one last thing before we move on to the other norm. And this is sort of me speaking my truth in this moment, right? This conversation, a conversation about race, about racism, about anti-racist practices, for all of us, many of us, is not without risk. And I count myself sort of among, right, those for whom this conversation has risk. As a Black woman with a position of sort of formal authority in the district, there is risk inherent for me, I feel, in this conversation. So I think if I can sort of acknowledge and name that I feel that there is risk for all of us, myself included, I hope that you will also sort of acknowledge the importance, right, of speaking your truth despite the risk that you think it might, the risk it might incur for you. I really encourage that for you. Um, Experiencing discomfort, right? So, it's inevitable, right? It's important. It is so important, I think, for us that you feel safe in this conversation. And it is also important for us to experience discomfort, right? Because discomfort produces often the impetus for change, right? So it's important that we feel some discomfort, that we experience it, that we sit in it, that we process why we're feeling that. It is important that you feel safe. We want you to feel safe, but we must not feel comfortable. We must experience some discomfort if we're going to come to this work honestly, and if we're going to do this work with intentionality. I don't know, Jen or Lara, if you want to add anything.
I in this context, I equate discomfort with growth. Right. So as you feel and experience the discomfort, think about the fact that it might just be that you're growing.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you. And then finally, oh, go ahead, Jen. Were you going to say something?
No.
And finally, the last norm, just to move us along, is expecting and accepting non-closure. So I said a couple minutes ago, this is a process, not a program. So you might walk away today feeling, and I know this is non-closure is not a comfortable place, I think, for educators, because we like to sew things up, button things up, get things done, right? We like to sort of beginning, middle, and end things, right? That's our nature, is to be fixers. We want to fix things. But I think inherent in this work is the idea that there's going to be some non-closure, and we have to expect that non-closure and accept it. And that, I think, sort of links back to the idea of feeling some discomfort, and that is sort of impetus for growth and for change. So I invite you to really sort of lean into these 4 agreements today. There might be one for you that you want to work in particular. Oh, if you don't mind muting yourself. Thank you. Thanks so much. I just really invite you to lean into all 4, and if there's one that you want to focus on, please feel free to do that. We're going to move on to the next slide. Alrighty, so today we're going to ask you, in the time that we have, to do some journaling. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds to cast your eyes about you and grab a piece of paper and something to write with, or if you want to open a screen on your laptop and do some journaling that way. I want to just give you 30 seconds just to find some way to do some journaling. We're going to do a little journaling today. We're going to ask that you hold on to these journals, sort of refer back to them throughout the session, and also sort of as we're going through this process this year, we're going to invite you to refer back to these journals. So put them in a place that you will be able to hold on to them. I'll give you just a second. And then here's the first journal prompt, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes to do some thinking and some writing here quietly. And so the prompt is this: what particular events from the past few months have impacted you personally and professionally? And we have intentionally offered this to you as a fairly broad prompt, just to give you an opportunity to sort of find your place here, and just do some thinking. So in terms of thinking about the last few months, what incidents or events in particular have impacted you personally and professionally? And so we're going to give maybe just about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe not the whole 5, maybe 3 or 4 minutes just to jot a few ideas, and then we'll come back. So we're not going to do a breakout room or anything. We'll just all be in the space together, and we'll come back in a few minutes. So just take about maybe 30 more seconds, 30 to 45 more seconds, and we're going to come back in just a few seconds here.
Okay, so hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to jot down their thoughts. Um, we thought it was important to take some time to reflect on this past few months and think about the why and why now. And that why and why now can be kind of a loaded phrase for each of us, particularly for me if I'm speaking my truth. Um, as you might imagine, based on my identity as a Black man, um, I, I've been really, impacted um, by the events of these past few months. Not only by the events themselves, but also by the reactions, both positive and negative. And I felt it was important. We felt it was important for um, us to enter this conversation with kind of the galvanized thinking of where am I right now? How am I feeling and why? Um, and I'm going to continue to say throughout this session, that's regardless of where you enter the conversation. For me, like many others, uh, we've been engaged in equity work and anti racism, for a long time. Um, but with events of the past few months, getting a lot of traction, seemed to be a lot of attention, and a lot of folks are really starting to kind of come to the table. There's been um, a magnifying glass, so to speak, really cast on some of the inequities that exist, not only in schools, but within society and that interplay. I think the events of the pandemic um, and just really seeing how marginalized communities were impacted, I think really kind of brought to the forefront some of the dynamics that folks have been grappling with, for a long time. Can you move to the next slide, Marie? So we decided to kind of put together a little collage of some of the things that might be galvanizing our thinking. And for me, I can't get out of my mind, um, that scene, uh, the officer um, pin having his knee just pinned on the neck of George Floyd. Um, but it wasn't just the act. It was kind of seeing the cavalier, kind of nonchalant, hands in the pocket. You know, I have both a analytical and emotional reaction, to that scene. I also understand the complexity that exists, in that image. The fact that, in this officer's mind and in the other officers that were standing around, they're just doing their job, right? And then this man pinned underneath who can't breathe, who's saying, I can't breathe. And yet this officer is just doing his job. He's just following protocol, right? And I imagine the others that were standing around viewing this, and thinking about the other officers, understanding the dynamic of being in a position where you're just following protocol, understanding the discomfort, just trying to understand, that complexity of their position of saying, this is happening. Do I have the power to challenge this? I mean, what I'm seeing right now, I mean, this is how I've been trained. This is the protocol under which I've been trained. I'm doing my job. Do I have the power to just not do my job and do something different in this scenario? And just the way that played out, I think underscores, for the nation and for the world, what this thing called institutional racism is all about. Like what's at the precipice of what we mean by that, right? And that's just one example, one of the most extreme examples that happened to be caught on video. But we know that every day, things of this nature occur. Maybe not to this extreme, maybe they're not caught on video, but every day. And every day, folks are grappling with this idea of just doing my job, of just doing what has been done before me, how I've been trained. It's, I mean, it's a very complex construct of, this thing that we are discussing when it comes to race, racism, institutionalized racism. And I think the hardest part, and speaking for myself, and maybe the hardest part for people to understand is that it doesn't require intent. It doesn't require intent. And so as we move forward, through this presentation, through this discussion, again, regardless of where you enter the conversation, speak your truth, into the conversation authentically, because sometimes, and I say that in a way, sometimes we want to move fast, we want to be, at this place, but sometimes we have to meet, ourselves where we are, right? We have this phrase, we say, meet the students where they are. Sometimes it's harder to meet ourselves, where we are. So meet yourself, where you are. And as you enter the conversation, speak your truth. Okay, there are going to be rooms for, making mistakes. I wouldn't worry about saying the wrong thing. In order for all of us to grow, we have to enter this conversation at the place that we entered the conversation. Jen or Marie, I'll invite you to speak or any comments.
Jen, are you going first?
I'll just I'll just say in relationship to this slide where we sort of were thinking about the idea of why we are now sort of investing ourselves or reinvesting ourselves or recommitting ourselves to this conversation. We talked about the incident that occurred here at the high school a couple years ago, Instagram. We talked about it at great length, and I'm not going to talk about it at great length here, but I think that from our perspective, as a community in our local context, as we are having this conversation about race and about anti-racist practices in our schools, this issue, this incident, this event continues, I will say, speaking my truth, to loom over us in some way as a community. And so part of speaking your truth is sort of saying those things which are uncomfortable, and saying those things which are painful or create pain for folks. And we don't say it to create pain for others, but we say it because it's important that we really speak our truth in all of its nuance, right? That we really sort of speak truth in all of the ways that we know that to be true. And so I wanted to make sure that as we are having this conversation, we're really sort of honestly facing, as a community, as individuals, we're honestly facing sort of the history, the situations, right? The context in which we are sort of moving forward. So that's the only piece I think I really wanted to add there. And Jen, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Well, I mean, you both said so much. I don't want to add too much. I guess just for me, kind of the why and things that were going on for me this summer in terms of all of my learning and unlearning and engagement this summer really focused around my role as an educator and my role as a teacher within an institutionally racist system, right? And my why really being, how do I use my role from within that system to try to move toward, collective liberation for all people. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
For me, okay. For me this summer, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this summer my backyard was vandalized during the night. Somebody came maybe with a dog because I also find dog poop. And then I was upset because I'm a human being. I was upset to have to replanted my flower in the pots because they were getting, they dug them out and things like that, and spilled my decorative objects everywhere on my grass. So the girl next door who is paranoid, who's scared of people, was in her backyard. And the next day she started spraying. And I didn't know. I went inside after watering my garden, and I felt dizzy. I checked my hypertension, it was high. I checked my glucose, it was low. And then one after that, three times I felt like that. And then the fourth time I heard a spray coming from her backyard, but I didn't see anyone. So at the end of the week, I came out in my backyard because that upsetted me. I felt upset, and I said very loud, "Black Lives Matter. If you don't stop spraying, I'll call the police." But that made me feel it's because I'm black. Maybe I have more than her. She's jealous. Why can't I water my garden? What should I be getting sprayed while watering my garden? I had the right to get upset because somebody vandalized my backyard during the night.
Thank you so
So
much for
that
sharing your comment.
impacted my health. Yeah, that impacted my health and also my job, because if I have to do a set of exercises for 30 minutes and in the morning 3 times and in the afternoon three classes. So if I start feeling dizzy, I might have to quit my job.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Much for sharing.
Actually, Dr. Wells is on this call with us and would like to chime in. So I want to open the space for you, Dr. Wells, right now.
No, I was just listening in on, anti-racist teaching and people speaking their truth in a safe place, and people, agreeing to having a safe space for people to speak from their heart, and being bold and courageous enough to put things on the table where others can benefit. As a Black man in chief leadership here in Albany, I get to see it from a number of different perspectives. One, I get to hear because I enjoy listening to people. I think it's important. But what I listen to often, I think far too often, is quite amazing. I hear people talk from a privileged and entitled position. And it reminds me how limited we can be when we see things from exclusively that position, some of which is self-serving. And then when you get into teaching and learning as it relates to our kids, we throw around the word equity, and that's used frequent and loosely, but what does it really mean? And how is that connected to anti-racist teaching? And then you throw in implicit bias. And what does that mean? We talk about it, and we talk it to death. So it begs the question, what do we do, and this is rhetorical for now, about these issues that are before us that have a great adverse impact on our children, and not just children of color, but all children, because of the warped perspectives that people gain by not addressing these kinds of issues. So for me, when we talk about equity, everything starts with statistic and data. And absent of having the infrastructure of data and statistics, we really don't know whether or not we're moving the needle in these key areas. For example, if equity is about getting folks what they need, and that means some people getting things that may not be the same and might be more of this and less of that, how do we do that absent of a guessing, absent of data? And so I grapple with those kinds of things that can have more of an applicable impact to our immediate community. But it does start with these kinds of conversations, having people listen and learn, do additional research, and then putting forth some kind of intentional plan that could be measured, that could generate both qualitative and quantifiable data that can guide our footsteps strategically in making a difference in this part of the world that can eventually spread out through other parts of the world. And so I guess at some point, we're going to have to move from just talking about it to being intentional about it in the form of some kind of plan that we can monitor and adjust based on the data that's generated, so that we know that we're moving the needle significantly where it can make a difference for all of our community, especially our kids. So that's kind of what I grapple with when I listen to these kinds of talks, and as I ask myself, what is my role and responsibility here as a chief leader here in Albany? And thanks for letting me share.
No problem. Thanks, Dr. Wells. Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next group of slides here, because we have a couple activities that we want you all to be able to participate in and give you a chance to be in some breakout rooms and do some chatting. So just for the next couple slides, we wanted to just share some terms that I think we don't often talk about in our school system, that I think we don't often talk about maybe at all in public conversation, but that I think are really important for us to sort of come to some shared understandings, right, as we are moving toward taking an anti-racist stance in our classroom and improving teaching and learning for students, which is ultimately our goal, as Dr. Wells is alluding to in his commentary. And so there are just 5 terms that we're gonna share with you, and maybe all of them actually are not new for you, but we want you, if you have the slides available and you can sort of follow along, and or if you want to take a couple pictures of the slides as we go through, we're going to ask you to do some journaling about this in just a couple minutes. So I'm going to go to the first slide, and then Larry, did you want to lead us off?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So just starting out, Marie, should I just read the definition out? I'll do that. Race as a biology. A race can be thought of as a genetically distinct subpopulation of a given species. However, the genetic differences among human groups we commonly view as races are inconsistent and insignificant. Genetically speaking, humans are 99.9% alike. Race as a social construct. Race artificially divides people into distinct groups based on characteristics such as physical appearance, ancestral heritage, cultural affiliation, cultural history, and ethnic classification. Race as a social construct remains a significant predictor of which groups have greater access to societal goods and resources, and which groups face barriers both historically and in the contemporary context to full inclusion. So I guess one of the things that resonates with me when I read that, thinking about that, is the fact that from an educational standpoint, as an educator, this idea that we can predict outcomes of students based on where they live, right? And we know that that has close ties to race. And we know that that comes from a history, whether, from eugenics and before, with, slavery and, and that institution. But we thought it was important to first start out with a definition of race to set the context for our language moving forward. The next slide. Okay. All right, Marie, you want to jump in again?
Yeah, I'll read this one. This whiteness. Being perceived as white carries social and institutional status and identity imbued with legal, political, economic, and social rights and privileges that are denied to others. Whiteness rests on a foundational premise, the definition of whites as the norm or standard for human and people of color as deviant from that group. Whiteness is not acknowledged by white people, and the white reference point is assumed to be universal and is imposed on everyone. White people find it very difficult to think about whiteness as a specific state of being that could have an impact on one's life and perceptions. And for those of you that are sort of maybe coming to this term for the first time, I think a really good reading is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. The subtitle of the text is Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And we thought it was sort of really important to name this, right? Because I think in some circles, we're sort of beginning to sort of wrestle with this notion of whiteness or whiteness studies as sort of like an area of theoretical exploration. But unless we're sort of bringing all of the truth to light as we begin this journey or continue this journey toward equitable outcomes from students, I think we can do some, but not all of that which we might do. So, this might be a moment for folks where sort of you're having some feelings or some big feelings. And so I want you to sort of be aware of what those feelings are and sort of where those might be coming from for you. And in just a couple minutes, we're going to give you an opportunity to keep processing. I'm going to go to the next slide, Larry.
Racism is a system in which one race maintains supremacy over another race through a set of attitudes, behaviors, social structures, and institutional power. Racism is a system of structured disequality where the goods, services, rewards, privileges, and benefits of the society are available to individuals according to their presumed membership in particular racial groups. A person of any race can have prejudices about people of other races, but only members of the dominant social group can exhibit racism because racism is prejudice plus the institutional power to enforce it. Racism is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It is not limited to a single act or person. I think that the key phrase to highlight here, and I think this is kind of a place where that causes a lot of confusion and a lot of complexity when people talk about, well, why can't other, people of color be racist? I think just highlighting the fact that a person of any race can have prejudices, but only members of the dominant social group can exhibit racism because racism is prejudice plus institutional power. Okay, so people of color can be prejudiced, but having that prerequisite of institutional power is what constitutes race and racism. Jen?
So white supremacy does not refer to intentions or actions, but to an overarching political, economic, and social system of domination. In The Racial Contract, Charles W. Mills describes white supremacy as an unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today, yet it is rendered invisible while other systems, socialism, capitalism, fascism, are identified and studied. Race scholars use the term white supremacy to describe a socio-political economic system of domination based on racial categories that benefits those defined as perceived as white. And I'll just throw in that we had a long talk about the title of this slide and whether to just leave it at white supremacy or to kind of like couch it and add the word white supremacy culture, or how, because of the the strong images that the words white supremacy bring up for so many people, and what we imagine in our minds, maybe visually, when we think of white supremacy. But we decided after a lot of talking about it that this is what we're talking about. And so I would ask, Larry or Marie to kind of join in on that.
Marie?
Oh, go ahead, Larry. Go ahead. Some good insight about this, Larry. I think you should share it.
Well, so we were kind of we kind of had some debate when we were putting together this particular slide about whether we title the slide "White Supremacy" or "The Culture of White Supremacy." And we decided to just go with white supremacy, just to highlight the fact that it is kind of it's the dominant dynamic under which this conversation is taking place, for the dominant dynamic under which all of these other terms are situated for the basis of our discussion. We know that a lot of institutions, including our schools, most notably our schools, are based on white supremacy, and we know that there is a culture that exists that was baked in. A part of the design of schooling was based on maintaining a social construct and a status of power for the dominant group.
Our last slide here is anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness voids Blackness of value while systematically marginalizing Black people and their issues through overt racism and the covert structural and systemic racism, which categorically predetermines the socioeconomic status of Black people. The structure is held in place by anti-Black policies, institutions, and ideologies. I think if we think about all of these slides, this notion of systems, economic systems, political systems, is sort of repeated throughout all of these slides, which I think is a reinforcer to us that these terms, that these systems, racism, white supremacy, anti-Blackness,
Good morning.
right, all of these systems are in place such that the dominant group benefits from goods and services, and non-dominant groups of color, Black people, as a group don't benefit, right? So Larry made this profound quote that he didn't just share right now when we talk, so I'm gonna quote him. When yesterday we were talking about the white supremacy slide, and we were sort of trying to navigate the title, as Jen said, Larry's comment was the culture of white supremacy, the system of white supremacy is far more damaging to me as a Black man than any individual instance of somebody walking around with a hood, right? And so I think, again, just being mindful that we're talking about systems. We're not talking about individual acts, individual incidences. We're not talking about individual persons. What we're talking about are systems that are set up, have been established to privilege and perpetuate privilege for one group, while at the same time removing privilege, taking away the opportunity for privilege for another group, right? So we're really talking about systems, not about individual folks. So we want to give you an opportunity now to think about these terms and to do some journaling, and we're actually going to give you a chance to talk to each other. It's high time that you did. So we're going to give you a chance to talk to each other. So we have a couple questions for you. Jen, if you will share the bit.ly again in the chat, just so that as people are in their groups, they can sort of pull it up and take it to their breakout groups with them. So the two questions that we want you to grapple with in your groups are, number one, what's your initial reaction as you're seeing, reading, hearing these terms? What's resonating? What are you resisting? And what questions are you asking is question number one. And then question number two is, how are you connecting these terms? And we're not asking you to respond to all of these, bullets, just pick one. How are you connecting these terms to your personal and professional life experiences? So as Dr. Wells sort of alluded to, and so let me put a point on it, right? We are doing this work in service of improving student teaching and learning, right? We are doing this work in service of improving teaching and learning for students. But we recognize that if we are to dismantle these systems that perpetuate harm to our students of color, particularly in our systems, that first we must be able to identify them and identify ways in which we as individuals or as a system are perpetuating these systems in order to dismantle them. And so that's why we want you to think about how these terms might be connected to you personally and or professionally, how these terms, you might be connecting these terms to each other. So maybe how does the term race connect to the term whiteness for you? And or how these terms connect to what you know and or what you observe sort of in your local context, in our AUSD community, or in a broader context, or based on your knowledge of history. So we're really just asking you to journal for 5 minutes. Again, just sort of on your own, you're gonna journal around these two questions in response to, in reference to these terms that we've shared. And then we're gonna put you in a breakout room and we're gonna give you about 1.5 minutes each to share. We'll put you in groups of 4. We'll give you about 1.5 minutes to share out. Somebody will time keep, and we'll give you a couple minutes just to group talk, and then we're gonna invite some voices into this space. So I'm gonna say it's 10:19 right now. At 10:24, you're gonna find yourself whisked into a breakout room with 4 other people. You're gonna share your responses just very briefly, and then have an opportunity for some group talk.
Are we in breakout room?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Thank you.
We're going to give you just one more minute to journal, and then we're going to send you to breakout rooms in just 1 minute. Okay, folks, I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. There'll be 4 or 5 of you in the room, so remember your instructions. Well, you should introduce yourself to folks first in the room. Tell folks where you're from in terms of school. Just take a quick minute to do that. And then you're going to share out your reflections to both of the questions. I'll give you a couple minutes each, and then we'll give you some time for group talk. So here you go.
What's that? Where is my thing? Drawing breakout room.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I have resumed the recorder. I tried to give you a few extra minutes in your groups. I know it's never enough, but we'll have plenty of time to keep talking. What I'd like to invite is, we just have a couple minutes. I'd like to invite maybe 3 or 4 of you, if you would like to share a comment about your breakout room conversation. If you go to participants and you see the list, you can raise your hand there. I'm going to take maybe the first 4 people that raise their hands and give you an opportunity to share for just 30 to 45 seconds. So I see 2 hands, and so I'm looking for just 2 more. I see Sarah Ward and Dave Hovey. And so if 2 more folks want to jump in and volunteer to share something that you heard or something that you said, I will take 2 more. And then I see 3. I see Dean Becca will be 3rd. And maybe a 4th person will come forward while Sarah is speaking. So Sarah, Ward, if you would unmute yourself and then just share for 30 to 45 seconds, sort of your conversation in your group. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Sure, so it's real quick. Really appreciated the conversation I had in my breakout room. And one of the things we all kind of got to was the fact that this is new, the fact that in this district, in our day before school, that we all took the time together to learn this language for those of us who didn't know it before. As teachers, there's lots of buzzwords and lots of terminology that we just use without thinking about it, SEL or NGSS, and it's a common teacher language. And the fact that the words white supremacy, institutional racism are being added to our language, that opens up possibilities for discussion in our departments, in our sites, and gives license, I think, to have more difficult conversations. So I think the language is really important, and it's not like we couldn't have these conversations before, but we have this equipment, new tools and equipment to do this with each other. So I think that's a big new thing, good new thing.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your comments. I'm going to take Dave Hovey. Dave, are you there?
Yes, I had to demute. It's a big screen now, so I got to find that button. So yeah, I try and pronounce it Dave, but back to the subject. So we had very different origins, and one of us was certainly a pale-skinned person raised in a minority situation, and that their teachers and colleagues were of a different skin tone. But even in that context, she was mindful of the additional privileges she was getting because of her privilege. We're noticing that this is definitely a time of change. The fact that we're meeting on this subject, that's excellent. We got some praise definitely of the book White Fragility. It's spreading quickly through the houses that can get a hold of a physical copy. It's in high demand, which is nice. Unmute, thanks. So we're noticing that as students are coming in from their different contexts, we need to, my phrase is love them where they are, but we at least need to teach them where they are. And they're coming from very different situations, and we need to teach them in their different contexts. And that ties into the next thing, which is media. Your Twitter feed can give you things you're not prepared for. There's attacks that are very focused, and people live in certain media bubbles. That makes where the learners come from very different, and even where adults and our families and their families are in very different places. I'm reminded, I don't think it was Walter Cronkite, but someone observed that in the past, our interpretations of the facts varied widely. And in the 21st century, our agreement on even what those facts are vary very widely, because it's so easy for people to live in their different information bubbles. I think that fits my time budget.
Thanks, Dave. Next, Dean Becker, please jump in.
Dave.
Hi, one of the things I like about this district is whenever we have meetings, we have a series of meeting norms. And one of the things I would be curious about adding to the meeting norms is this meeting an example of privilege? For example, last spring, I was in a meeting with 2 attorneys, 2 parents, the district, the administrator, and it was a long drawn out meeting. And I thought, this to me is an example of privilege. And if there were a checkbox on the meeting where we could discuss whether or not it was an example of privilege, then I would feel like we were maybe doing something about it. I have students, parents who want to meet with me for 35 to 45 minutes about whether or not their student should get a B or an A on a particular assignment or something. And yet I have struggling students whose parents are very difficult to interact with. And so for me to use up those 35 minutes with a student who's doing okay and not with a student who's struggling, to me, that's an example of privilege. And I don't want to not help the student who's getting a B to get an A. I just want to say, as part of our norms, could we identify whether or not this is an example of privilege? Since we've all agreed that privilege is a problem and it's part of the inequity in our education system, I would like to see next week a box on our meeting norm. And that's all. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Dean Becker. Okay, so we had time for 4 comments. And so those of you who raised your hands, additionally, we would love to hear from you, but we're going to have to move on from this chat. We'll come back to it. And I am going to, I muted myself, sorry. I'm going to turn this over to Jen. I'm going to reshare my screen and then turn this next piece over to Jen. So hold on 1 second.
All right, and I'm gonna do like kind of a mad dash through this. And I hope that, because we're I think that what we've done so far has been super important. And I think that it's a good example of how you can't rush through work that's important. And so your pacing when you're doing your own work or working with your students is really important to have flexibility to modify. So I'm gonna kind of talk through this really quickly because I know we're coming up on the end of our meeting in just about 20 minutes. So I have an activity for you to try, and I think we're going to abbreviate it a little bit in terms of what maybe we were hoping in terms of processing it. But we wanted you to have an activity to walk away from, not only to do for yourselves in thinking about when you step into your role tomorrow with a new group of students, who are you in that moment when you walk into that classroom? What identity are you bringing with yourself? And then also giving you this as an example of something you can do with your students as well. I just wanted to talk for a quick second about identity. Identity is who you are, who a person or a thing is. And there are many, many, many ways that we can define ourselves in terms of our identity. A lot of times we make assumptions about people, and other people place these markers on us, but ultimately identity is really how you define yourself, what your story is and where you're coming from. And so there are many ways you can do that. And you get to choose how to name your identity markers. And so this is an activity that probably a lot of us have done in a variety of ways with students, and it's an identity map. And so Marie, if you could just go to the next slide. So this is my identity map. And on at the end of my work with this, there's a blank slide if you'd like to copy this and use it. But the first thing I did on my identity map is just start to include some of my own identity markers. And it's a very interesting and kind of vulnerable and intimate process to go through. You know, a lot of the work I've done this summer is kind of thinking of myself as a white person in the context of what's happening in the world right now. So to stop and really think about that I'm not just lumped in with every other white person that's out there, that there are parts of my identity that make me unique and make me who I am and give me my perspective. So these are some of them. So that's the first thing that I did, was just to write down my markers. Obviously not all of them, but kind of, you know, I had to stop at some point. So, okay, and then Marie. Next slide. So then, and I've done this with students too, starting to think about which parts of me do you know when you walk by me on the street, which ones are external that you know right away, and which ones are internal. And so if you, while I'm talking about this, want to start on your jotting notes about your own markers and kind of work on that list, that would be fine. But what it really was striking to me when I kind of started to color code things that are external versus internal, there were very, very, very few markers that you would know about me just by walking by me on the street. And so, so many of those things you'd have to make more time to get to know me before you knew those things. And then I left a couple of them gray because I was realizing that even for me personally, these things might be external. You might walk by me on the street and know that I'm white, or assume that I'm able-bodied, but you might not know something. I might be passing as white, and I might have another race that is not identifiable. I might have some sort of chronic health issue that people can't see on the outside, and I might have, you know, a different way of identifying my gender. So those are things that I think lots of times we think are external, but they're actually, you know, for a lot of people can be internal. So this was kind of another powerful slide for me to do. When I've done this work with kids, I've kind of stopped right here. And I know some teachers that have done like a bag where they've had students write on the outside of the bag the external markers and put on the inside the more personal things, and use that as a way to share. Okay, I'm rolling through. Next one, Marie. So then I started thinking about privilege and oppression and this idea of intersectionality, and how there's a lot of complexity to our identities, and how our perspective is really comes from, in some ways, our identity is, we find ourselves in the dominant group, while in other, it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. In some other areas and in some other situations, I find myself in the more oppressed group, not the dominant group. So obviously, just visually from the colors, I'm clearly a very privileged person as I walk through the world. And that was, we had a lot of interesting discussions, the three of us, when we were creating today's presentation. And I really appreciated the fact that I was one of 3 people, and I was the only white person in the group, and that was a very powerful experience for me, because I'm used to walking through the world being in the dominant group. And so to have that kind of dynamic shifted was powerful, you know, to just have things flipped a little bit. So we can, oh, can you switch back? I just want to talk about my tech savvy one, which is, normally I wouldn't highlight that as a privileged thing, but I know heading into the school year where we are remote teaching, being a person that has tech skills was making me feel, in this moment of heading into a remote learning situation, feel that that was putting me as a teacher in a position of privilege. And those of us I know who have less experience with technology are feeling a lot more overwhelmed, a lot more feeling disadvantaged as they head into work with their class. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. Then this is the part of the activity that I really think was the most powerful, and that was that I tried to really think about which parts of my identity are most important to me, which ones really make me feel like I am who I am. And so it was a hard one to do, but I did. And then on the next slide, I did the parts of my identity that I feel, and Marie, if you want to click to it, parts of my identity that I feel were validated when I was a student, or you might think that are validated as you walk through your life, and that you, or are validated for you in your work as an employee. And so if you, Marie, wouldn't mind just flipping back and forth between these two for a second, what you'll notice is that the things that are most important to me about my identity are not necessarily the things that are validated in school. And so just thinking about that for you, but also for your students, that the way our school system is set up, we are definitely validating through our curriculum, through our structures, through the rules and expectations we set, through our standardized testing. We are validating the dominant group in our system. And so just the importance of getting to know your students and knowing what's important to them, and how, and then how our systems are set up, and how we can challenge our systems to not only validate students in the dominant group.
Jen, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So that this slide kind of takes me back to my first year teaching. I had just moved out from the South, and I was starting in my classroom at Oakland Tech. And I remember prepping, for my first day. And I was kind of going through this process of like, imagining, what it would be like, trying to figure out like what are some of the things that I, wanted to convey to students. And I remember just really making sure that I convey like my content knowledge to them and my ability to be able to really kind of help them learn. And that was at the forefront of my mind. Fast forward, got into the classroom and started interacting with the students. What I did not realize, or what I later realized, what they got most out of me before the content was the fact that I was a Black man from the South with a Southern accent. Directly right after the Hurricane Katrina, they were asking, "Hey, do you have family in New Orleans?" That, for me, I was focused on, really trying to make sure that my content knowledge was strong, and that I was able to kind of move them along academically. But what they were what they were more amazed by initially was just my identity, and just being conscious of my, being a large Black man walking into a classroom. It's going to provoke a different dynamic than it may be you walking into a classroom based off my assumptions, their assumptions, right? And all of that is important. That's going to dictate how I'm able to facilitate learning. It's going to facilitate how the level of trust that they garner from me and for you, right? And so I just want to kind of highlight this aspect of validation, right? Of what we, sometimes value in ourselves, but what the reality of what's validated in the space, right?
Thanks, Larry. So I know we're coming to the end of our time, and I know that there's more to talk about. We were hoping to give you time to work on your own map, and to highlight, one and another of whichever of those categories resonated with you the most. There's a slide copy here in the slideshow, and someone in the chat I just saw asked if I would post it on the EdTech website, and I'll definitely do that, so that you can have that template. So if we could just skip that one. Oh, and then if you are doing this with students, there's a little bit of an idea of how you might process it at the end in the breakout room discussion thing. But then I just wanted to really quickly circle back around and just really point out that, that a lot of these markers are socially constructed. And so we've been taught to categorize people in these ways, and that we've been taught that by the people with power. And we've been taught that for the very explicit reason of maintaining that power. And so for dominant groups to maintain that power. And so I would love to challenge, all of us moving forward to challenge that structure. So I did also link to the social justice word wall, because a lot of the words relating to identity and identity markers are included there. So if you're trying to gather kind of vocabulary for your students, you can find a lot of stuff there. And I want to thank you for being a safe space for me. It's kind of a vulnerable position to be in, to just like map your identity out there. And someone said you really do want to create community in your classroom, and make it feel and guarantee that it's a safe space. And so I just really value the fact that I feel that this community was a safe enough place for me to do that. So thank you.
Oopsie. Okay, Larry, keep going. I'm something with Google. I'm going to see if I can get it back. Keep going.
Yeah. So thank you, Jen, for sharing that. I kind of want to do a little bit of reflection. So we were kind of talking about the gender mapping, and we had a discussion about my gender map, or my identity map, and Marie's identity map, and would it feel or come off a certain way if it's only Jen that presented hers. But where we decided to just let Jen present hers in the interest of time, but we want to highlight the fact, as I said earlier, acknowledge that our mapping and what we identify and what resonates with us personally may align or may be different than what others see or value in us first, right? And so it's important to acknowledge that. So why is this important? We feel that it's important for professionals to acknowledge who they are, how they are perceived walking into the classroom, right? Or education professionals, right? How we perceive by our students, right? And also get a sense of from students how they perceive us, and so we can utilize that information to better facilitate learning. I just want to kind of go through this. So we kind of pulled a couple of slides from slide.net, just kind of plucked them off the internet here. Student voice describes students giving their voice to what happens within the school and classroom. We want to encourage students to know that their experiences, opinions, and ideas are valued in all aspects of school life. Student voice can feature in all aspects of our classwork, from students participating in small group classroom conversations, students joining in curriculum design, or developing school policy. Again, I speak from my own personal experience as both a professional educator and also a student. Coming from the student, those times where I felt like my presence, my voice, my experiences and opinions were valued, made me more likely to engage with not only the classroom, the material, but also with the teacher. And those are the experiences that I remember. It feels great to feel valued, right? Yeah, like to know that if there was a day that I was not missing, that I went missing in the classroom, or if I missed a day, that was going to be a different class session, right? Because the teacher recognized that my voice, my experiences, my opinions were not going to be a part of the collective group. And that in itself will change that experience, not only for me, but for all students. And so just understanding the value that, surfacing all opinions and ideas and experiences in your classroom, understanding the value of that and how that enriches the experiences for all students is very important. Okay. So we know that student achievement and engagement will increase when students have more ownership of their school, community, and of their learning. And so, as I mentioned previously, we talked about why student voice is important inside of the classroom, but also we know that based on the dynamics of society, that it's also important for them to feel a sense of ownership in the classroom, but also within the school and the community. But we think as professionals, we could kind of set the stage for modeling that in the classroom, getting them that practice of voicing themselves in the classroom could then flow out to the school and also into the community, which is something that's very much needed.
And so we have unfortunately come to the end of our time, and it's right at 11. And so I just wanted to share a little closure and next steps with you so that you know that this is the first of many conversations. We will be returning to these conversations frequently. And so you'll see there's a link to some session feedback. We just asked some general questions and would love your feedback as we continue planning these workshops for you. And we heard this in the forum on the 13th of August, I believe, that folks were really interested in sort of developing collaborative groups with one another, sort of cross-grade, right, to continue to meet and have these conversations. And so we want to let you know that we heard you, and we're going to be setting that work up, setting those groups up. And so we will be inviting your participation as we move forward. We also today in the chat, if you've not taken a peek in there, you can download it. There are some excellent book recommendations, excellent podcast recommendations, right? Everybody doesn't have time to read a whole book, but you could listen to a podcast, or there are many great folks you could be following on Twitter and be getting ideas. And I know that Jen and Rich have linked a lot of Twitter accounts to the EdTech website. And so we want to create opportunities for folks to share reading and process and talk about what they're reading. I'm really interested to share with somebody or somebody's my reading of Bettina Love's book. And I know that there are lots of people that are reading really great things to share, right? And so that's another piece that we're going to be setting up in the very near future. And then we sort of want to hint at where we're going next, right? So we know that we are doing this work in service of, dismantling inequities in education and in our world, and creating a more just system for our students. And so their voice, student voice, is a crucial part of that. And so when we meet again soon, we will be centering the voices of our students, because we think that it's really important, if we're going to serve students in a way that leads to equitable outcomes, we need to hear from them, right? We need to invite our students into that learning partnership. And so we're really excited that at our next session, sort of where we ended today with Larry talking about student voice, is where we're going to pick up at our next session and really spend a lot of time not only thinking about ways to include student voice and elevate student voice and leverage student voice, but also to hear actually from our students. So we're really excited about that. I want to thank Larry and Jen for your partnership. I want to thank all of you that stayed on this call. This is not a great venue for this type of work, but I just really appreciate your engagement and your wonderful comments and your talking to each other and your comments around keeping this conversation going. So I don't need to have the last word. We're 2 minutes over, so I'm going to give Larry and Jen 30 seconds to close us out. Larry and Jen, please.
Jen, I'll let you go first. Go.
Oh, I'm just loving watching the chat roll by, and I'm so thankful that everybody is as committed to this work, or that a lot of people are as committed to this work as we are, and I'm really looking forward to kind of helping continue that thread throughout the year. So thank you.
I just want to piggyback on both of those comments. I really appreciate everyone staying engaged, really taking on this work. It's very complex, so give yourself a little bit of room to make mistakes. I mean, even I'm still learning, right? About my own experiences, right? So key, just go back to staying engaged, right? Speak your truth, approach the work from the place that you enter it, right? And know that you have colleagues, you have people that are working in this as well, and feel free to use them, use myself, use us as collaborators, co-conspirators, uh, et cetera, right? Thank you, guys.
Thank you, folks. Have a great rest of your day. I'm going to leave the room open and the chat open for just a couple more minutes, but do wish you a great rest of your day tomorrow and an amazing first day of school tomorrow. You got this, folks. We got this together. Take care.
We got.
Thank you, Marie.
There's union meetings.
Thank you, Martha. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for everything. Toodles.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Take care, Morgan. Bye, Morgan. Take
Thank
care.
you, Marie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right. You take care. Bye, Nancy. Good to see your
Glad
face.
to make it.
Bye, darling.
Thanks, everyone. Have a mountaintop Monday.
All right, Will. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for all this training. It's really, really thought-provoking. I appreciate all of you.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. It's lovely being here. It's really amazing.
Hi, Catherine. So nice.
You guys are wonderful. You're like my dream.
Oh no, so nice to meet you virtually. Look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Yeah. This has been like the most like life-affirming first day ever. I'm so happy.
Wonderful. Great for you.
So
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Look forward to meeting you in person.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. You take care and have a wonderful day.
You too.
Alrighty.
Marie, where can I find the video from this morning's meeting? Not this one, but the one before. I missed some because I was having Zoom issues. Yeah.
So we just recorded it. It'll be uploaded to the EdTech website today or tomorrow for sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks. Take care, Valerie. Have a great year.
You too. You too.
Here, take care.
Yep. Thanks for all your work, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mann. Have a great first.
Thank you, Mr. Mann.
Will do. Thank you. Good to see you and hear from you, Larry.
Likewise.
And Jen, of course.
Thank you.
Right. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and then also close the room. So stop recording.